Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, this is the podcast for you. Hosted by writer-producer Steve Cubine and actress-writer Nan McNamara. And now, Steve and Nan.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this preview of our next episode of From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. So, Steve, this is a companion piece to our previous episode. And tell us what the inspiration was.
Well, it is a companion piece, and it's basically based on the famous W.C. Fields adage that, you never work in show business with kids or animals. And we talked about the kids. And so now we're going to talk about the animals, famous animals in cinema, which will be fun.
Well, it's going to be a lot of fun. In fact, there were so many animals that we didn't get to all of them. Yes. So as we like to do in these previews, let's talk about a couple of animals that we don't get to talk about in the episode, starting with, I'm going to throw a photo at you.
Yes.
This lovely little fellow.
Oh, yes. I mean, probably the most famous horse in film history. Of course, that's Trigger with his cowboy owner, Roy Rogers. I think, back in the day, the 30s and 40s, there was no one more famous than Roy Rogers and his wife, Dale Evans, and the horse Trigger. They were just part of cinema history. They were part of our culture. Everybody knew them. Everyone loved them. But, Trigger has a really interesting story. He started out on a ranch, and he was owned by a guy named Roy F. Cloud. Trigger's original name was Golden Cloud. I guess probably.
Really? I did not know that.
A little narcissistic on Roy F. Cloud, the name him Golden Cloud, probably.
Yes.
When he was about 3 years old, Golden Cloud was sold to the Hutchins Stables of Hollywood, and they were one of the biggest suppliers of horses to the movies. And of course, during that era, Westerns were everywhere. So there was such a great need for horses. And, Trigger, Golden Cloud, really had a knack for training and learning. So I think, at the Hutchins Stables, they pretty much knew that he was going to be a great horse for the movies. When they teamed up Trigger with Roy Rogers, it was just a match made in heaven. I mean,
really?
Roy just found the perfect horse for him, and he knew it. And I think there was such an affection that Roy Rogers had for Trigger. Actually, Roy Rogers is the one who named him Trigger because that was the character's name in his movies. He went to the Hutchins Stables and he offered to buy Trigger. He really wanted him. It was such a deep personal connection. Well, his mouth dropped when Hutchins said, "Oh yeah, I'll sell him to you, but it's going to be $2,500, which is the equivalent of like $46,000 today."
Oh.
And Roy Rogers at that point was just starting out his career. He wasn't really in a financial position to pay for Triggers. So they worked out sort of a layaway plan where Roy would make
that with a coat once.
Exactly, like at Walmart or something. Like Roy would make installments on Trigger. And it took him, a long time to do it, but he eventually paid off Trigger. He owned Trigger. And he always said it was the best $2,500 he ever spent.
So you talked about the deep affection that Roy Rogers had for Trigger, and it's sort of reminiscent of what we hear about cowboys, and the movies, that they fell in love with their horses, that their horses were, their protectors in a way to, get them out of tight spots. I mean, they were their work companion. I mean, I can understand how that affection would really be there.
I kind of think in a way that horses became an extension of the star. And that simpatico had to be there and had to be so spot on, I think, for it to work. And the chemistry that Roy had with Trigger was just amazing. They appeared in so many movies together. They would go out to children's hospitals and do appearances with Trigger. I mean, I think Roy Rogers had such a philanthropic heart that he understood children's love of Trigger. And so he combined all of that together in really wonderful ways.
In fact, he was so in love with Trigger that this happened.
Yes, I think a lot of people know this story, but Trigger lived a nice long life. He died when he was about 33, but Roy couldn't bear to part with him. He didn't want to bury him, he didn't want to cremate him. So he had him meticulously stuffed. He wanted to have Trigger there. He and his wife Dale Evans used to have a Western cowboy museum near, I think, Victorville. They ended up placing Trigger in their museum. He became the number one attraction. Everybody swarmed up to see Trigger because there's stuff in the museum. But unfortunately, Dale and Roy got older. They ended up closing the museum, and ultimately, Trigger went on the auction block, which seems just sort of. I'm sure that
Oh,
broke Roy Rogers' heart. In fact, I don't even know if it happened before or after Roy died, but Trigger ended up being sold at auction for $266,000 to a television cable station, RDF TV. And the station, they were planning to open a Western museum. So for now, Trigger sits in the lobby of RDF TV in Branson, Missouri. And the saddest part is the building's not even open to the public, so nobody can even go see Trigger anymore.
oh, that's a shame. I mean, it seems like with the Autry Museum that we have
Yeah,
here and being in Branson, there's so
yeah.
many opportunities, it would seem, for him to
Yeah, you
be
you
on
think they would
display.
open it to the public and make some money off of him.
Yeah, yeah, I would think so.
Maybe we
Well,
should start a campaign. Let's save Trigger and get him to the Autry.
I wanna see him. I really
Right.
do.
So that's the
Um,
story of Trigger, which
that's
you can read about on the blog. We unfortunately didn't get enough time on the podcast to get to him, but really wonderful, fascinating story.
now there's another one we didn't get a chance to talk about. I'm just gonna put this photo up.
Oh, you know what? I think this cat is probably responsible for the popularity of the Siamese cat during the 60s and 70s.
I bet you're right.
This cat is called Syn, Syn, and he was the cat from the Disney movie That Darn Cat in 1965, which starred Dean Jones and Haley Mills.
Oh,
And
I
the
love
cat,
them.
yeah, and the cat in the movie was named DC. Syn, who played DC, was adopted at the age of 2 by the legendary animal trainer Bill Kohler from an animal shelter in Ontario, California. I think Bill Kohler paid a whopping $5 for this future feline star
Oh my goodness.
because Sin was purportedly dropped off at the shelter because he was too aloof. Which I think
Really?
there's a special place in hell for people who drop off pets because of stupid reasons like that.
Well, stupid reason since most cats, I always consider most cats aloof, so that doesn't seem like any reason at all.
Exactly. Like you're either a cat person or a dog person, and I think people that like cats sort of like that independence and that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Well, Sin ended up being trained, and he was, also very great at receiving signals and getting cues. Well, he made his Hollywood debut in a really another wonderful Disney movie called The Incredible Journey in 1963. And it is basically the story of these three unlikely friends, animals, who have to traverse over the Canadian wilderness to be reunited with their family. And it's also a Labrador and a Bull Terrier and Sin the cat. And apparently, the biggest challenge for this movie was getting Sin the cat and Muffy the Bull Terrier not to kill each other.
I would imagine. I mean, that what a difficult thing. Think about that.
Yes, well, I mean, apparently they hated each other, and anytime that Muffy would walk into the room, Sin would just hiss and go crazy. So it took months to get the two of them just to be in the same room, walking side by side together. But eventually they became friends, and they made this wonderful movie. And if you haven't seen it, it's so heartwarming and so thrilling. It's really a good movie. There's adventure, there's danger, there's a lot of good stuff in that one.
You're describing the relationship between those two animals reminds me of Veronica Lake. We talked about that on a previous episode in Frederick March.
Or Joel McRae, or yeah, you name the co-star, they
Many,
probably did not
yeah,
have, like,
yeah, so I guess it's true that it's not just animals, or it's not just people, right? It's
yeah,
animals
yeah.
too.
So those are a couple of the animals we didn't get to, but we also have many more on the blog. So check that out, and make sure you check out our podcast, which will be coming out on Sunday night. And yeah, that's it's good stuff.
Yeah, you can find us wherever you find your podcasts. And until next time, we hope you'll give a listen.
Absolutely.